start? I'm going to start? Okay. All right. We have a live stream audience, which is why I am looking up at the camera too. And we're recording today's event so that we can also share Joseph's story with the BARD network. So welcome to this end of your second week of L+T. Congratulations. I think that in of itself deserves a round of applause. And in person, something that we sorely missed last year in 2020. So we are thrilled to be able to have you with us in person and be doing these rostrums in person. Let me introduce myself. My name is Erin Canan. I'm the Vice President for Civic Engagement. Some of you may have seen us in some panels over the last week, and we've hosted a various number of events. We keep saying we have jobs through the Center for Civic Engagement, and please, if you're interested in working with us, please look on Handshake. I just want to introduce one of my colleagues, Caitlin O'Donnell. Caitlin, do you want to say hi? Great, thank you, Caitlin. Caitlin's also an alum of the BARD MBA program in sustainability, so if you're curious about some of the graduate programs, she can help answer your questions. This event today is sponsored by the Center for Civic Engagement, and we're hosting Joseph Kim, class of 2019. He is an author and North Korean refugee, and he's going to be in discussion today with Professor Rosenblum, who's Professor of International Law and Human Rights. Joseph is an assistant and expert in residence on the Human Freedom Initiative at the George W. Bush Institute, and we want to thank them for their sponsorship of his travel and for helping us coordinate this event. Joseph was born and raised in North Korea, and at the age of 12, his father died of starvation. He was separated from his mother and sister. In 2006, Joseph escaped North Korea and went to China. And in China, he connected with an international NGO, Liberty in North Korea, and a year later, he left China for the United States. In 2013, Joseph delivered a TED Talk. We were just talking about how if you've given a TED Talk, you still can be nervous when you're talking, so that public speaking nerves never go away. And he spoke on the importance of hope and published a memoir called Under the Same Sky. He graduated in 2019 with a BA in Political Studies from BARD, and his senior project was titled Marketization in North Korea is Corrupting the Corrupted. And so we're very pleased to welcome him here in person on campus. Thank you so much for traveling, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you both. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just say a couple of words, and then turn it over to Joseph to talk a little bit. And then I have some questions to get started in a conversation with Joseph. And I don't know how we've organized it to take questions. Do we have a microphone from the audience too at some point? Is that, I should have asked.
We've been asking questions without the mic, and it seems to be okay.
Okay, good.
Just make sure that you repeat the questions so that
Sure.
those who are watching can hear.
Great. So I'm Peter Rosenblum, and it's a pleasure to see you all, and I hope to meet many of you in the course of your time at BARD. I teach human rights, and I came to BARD after a fairly long career in human rights in different parts of the world. And I had the pleasure of having Joseph in my class. So when I heard he was coming here, I really leaped at the opportunity. Now, I don't leap at the opportunity to host every one of my former students. I love my former students, but it turns out that I do love some more than others. And I love them for the questions that they asked and the struggles they shared and what they brought to our classroom and to our community. And so many of you will be doing that. And Joseph did that in my class in a very special way. It was an introductory human rights class. And in some ways, you might think that to someone who himself was a refugee in some of the most horrific circumstances of escape and struggle that exist in our world today, that to be in a room with barred students talking about human rights would feel so distant and so naive, perhaps, and so lost. But Joseph really was able to dive in and to challenge us and challenge himself and challenge me in a way where the questions he asked and the things he reflected on have stayed with me until now. And I hope that here we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about that, because sometimes you might think about human rights as a kind of simple do-gooder tale, and it turns out, no. There are choices, hard choices, and a reality to achieving some improvements at risk of harms in other places. Not everybody can take that on, but it's something that really Joseph has lived and really brought to us. I'll just say one other thing about why, for me, it's so special. I have had a long career in human rights. I started my work in what was called Zaire, now the Congo, in the late Cold War years. I've spent time really in countries around the world doing field work. I've seen a lot of struggle. For me, North Korea was impossible to understand. For me, there are certain countries that were beyond reach, that were not connected in any way that I understood to the kind of struggles and the kind of movements that I was able to be a part of. And so I just ignored them. I can give you the list. There were a list of countries that for much of my life I just said, no, I don't know what to do. Nope, that's off the list. There's no hope for what I do, for the way I think about the world. And North Korea was on that list. So I kind of say that as provocation because it's certainly not on Joseph's, I mean, it is Joseph's list, and he has a lot to say about making those kinds of connections and being able to bring it back into a story of human rights. So now I've already spoken more than I said I would, but let me set things off then for you.
Well, first of all, hello. Thank you so much for that kind words about me. It's great to see you again, definitely, and great to be back on campus. I actually, my first year, I lived in Tewksbury, so which I can see it from here. Yay, there you go. Just one? Yes. My name is Joseph. I was born and raised in North Korea. When I was 12 years old, my father died of hunger, and about 2 to 3 million people died from starvation during that time, but I never thought that my father would become one of them, so I definitely was not ready for a world without father. And and then my older sister, was sold to a man in China, and I still don't know where she is. And my mother, to make a long story short, was sent to prison for attempting to leave North Korea without the government's permission, so I lived on the street as homeless for about 3.5 years. I think one of the biggest challenges about being homeless was learning how to break my pride. Otherwise, I could not go to strangers on the street and asking for the leftover food. There are a lot of other lessons that I learned and I appreciate today, but it's an experience that I do not want to repeat. I came to the United States in 2007. I did not speak a word of English, but the expectation was that I was to go to school start first year in high school, so 9th grade. Finished high school, went to New York City for 2.5 years for community college. I studied business management, and then when I transferred to Bard, I changed my major to political studies. And I will finish my remark with and I've been working on North Korean human rights issues, promoting the need of raising awareness about human rights issues in North Korea. And one of the reasons why I do it is because I care about North Korean people, and it is perhaps one of the darkest place on the in the world, on both literal and figurative speaking. But at the same time, one of the reasons why I wanted to work hard on this issue is because it's still a home for me, and it's a home to 25 million people. There is in South Africa, I think in Johannesburg International Airport, there is a message on the wall saying, they call it Africa, they call it Africa, but we call it home. In many ways, North Korea, yes, it is a dark place, but it's a place that I close to my heart, and I hope that it's a place where the darkness can be overcome. And lastly, I remember watching a movie a couple years ago titled on the basis of same sex. I think it was about Ruth.
Oh, Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the
yes,
basis of
yes.
sex. On the
There was a professor from Harvard where the law professor, during a lecture, he said, a judge will, give me 1 second. A judge will not be influenced by the weather of the day, but a judge will inevitably influenced by the climate of era. I think there are many different ways to interpret that beautiful sentence, but my takeaway was that, as Professor Rosenblum had mentioned, in times, changing North Korea seems so impossible, and I certainly can't do it by myself, but I believe collectively, as we have an opportunity to change and change for the good of the people suffering in North Korea. So again, great to be back, and thank you for the opportunity to share about my work and my story.
So let me start by taking the temperature of the room, finding about the weather of the day. How many of you feel like you have a general understanding of what makes North Korea particular in the story of politics and human rights? That's a good showing. That's pretty good. Does anyone want to shout out a couple of things that are on your mind when you raise your hands like that? Just shout it out. What is it what things make it particular in terms of politics and human rights? Speak loudly. Killing his uncle. So this kind of, the leadership is a very tightly controlled family leadership with tales of intrigue and of executions, disappearing of people. Okay, let's hear a few things just to have a sense. Yeah, excellent. Okay, any more? Control over emotions expressed in public. Control over, can you expand on that? Like control over everything in public, control over the public space? No, is there media? Is there media other than the state? Probably not. Anything else people would throw out? What about the borders?
It's historic relationship to China, Japan, and Russia.
Complex, so part of the story we're going to have to hear about at least China and South Korea, and maybe Russia and Japan. We'll hear, that might come into the conversation. Anything else? Border issue with South Korea, right? Not even technically a border, or maybe, yeah? And they don't play well with others, but how does that, anything else that was specifically on your mind with that?
I think they can't be influenced by countries like the US.
The influence seems almost like doesn't work, at least the ways that we think of, or there's something that really, that sense that it doesn't work, which will be key to what Joseph will talk to us about, how you influence a country that seems not to be influenceable in the other ways. So I would say, and people haven't mentioned the levels of repression or the uses of food, the reasons for starvation, the borders that are shut, some of the other elements of repression that have made it so extreme. Anyone else, anything else that people would shout out about that? I'm sure you have questions and we can get to those. Okay, now another temperature question. Do you guys believe in human rights? Raise your hands if you believe in human rights. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does it mean that you believe in human rights? Why don't you raise your hand? So someone who believes in human rights, just let me know what it means. You believe it exists, they exist, you believe, you have faith that those are things, you believe that all humans are entitled, you believe that your country should be working for them in other places? Is that what you meant? Or something else? Yeah, young woman there with a hand that looks like it's almost about to go up. Yeah, why not?
Okay, well, in my opinion, as much as like I feel like people should be, I guess, empathetic towards everyone, just because like I feel like for most people being empathetic towards other people, that's like what makes them feel like good and everything. I'm not sure if like clean-cut human rights exist. I think they should exist, and I think that people like deserve to have like I guess things because it's just like it's good to have like certain things I guess as a right, but I'm not sure if like that's a universal inherent thing.
You're not sure if it's universal and inherent, and as a result, maybe there aren't human rights in North Korea, and maybe we shouldn't care. Does that mean that? No, it doesn't mean that.
Am I allowed to respond?
Oh, sure. Sorry. I just wanted to get as much, like for you also to know what you're hearing and talking to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I'm not saying that like people in North Korea shouldn't have like rights or anything like that. I'm saying that because like things are so I guess obscure and like the definition of human rights differs depending on what I guess part of the world you're in. Um, it's very easy for people to like bend and like I guess edit and like alter the definition in any way they see fit, which is why I guess if you want to argue like that, if there is any human rights in North Korea, that like that they're bending the definition in their own way.
I see. Okay, so alas, I know this can be so interesting.
Enjoying this.
Okay, good, because I think it'll make the conversation, we'll figure out where to put it. So, does the United States or your country, wherever you are from, have some obligation, moral or legal, to work for human rights everywhere? Everywhere? In particular countries? In North Korea? And how would you even make that determination? So I can't see someone's brushing his hair or raising his hand. It's sometimes hard to tell. Yeah.
I think that, at least as someone who was like born and raised in America, that we have a lot going on ourselves right now that we need to figure out. That it can be difficult if you're trying to like intervene in other countries' issues and such when we have our own things that we don't even know how to properly solve.
Okay, great, okay. People are dying, they're starving in North Korea. It's a government that's doing it to them. It's pretty clear. Let's imagine, let's think for a second. Young man in the back.
I think there's a moral obligation, like if a specific country or government has like the financial means or like the surplus to provide support to, I guess I would say like marginalized or oppressed places, then there would be a moral obligation to enable, I would say human autonomy, just as kind of at the root of human rights, just like the inherent ability to
Okay, can I hear from two more people who haven't spoken, and then Joseph, if you have other questions to ask them, we can follow up with that, and otherwise go to you. So the young woman here and the young man in the back.
I think I think this question can be answered differently when it comes to different countries, but I think with countries with histories of imperialism and colonialism, it's a very complicated answer. For like the United States, where we have imperialized a lot of countries and sort of caused many human rights issues, I think the United States both has an obligation to use its resources to make those situations better, and at the same time has to do a better job of actually listening to what the people of those places actually need, instead of just doing things for profit or for the United States' own motivations.
Okay, keep that in mind, that listening to the people and when it's possible. And okay, young man in the back.
So yes, I definitely think that there is a moral obligation from not just from the U.S. or from any other country in the world, because when you see an injustice happening, if you don't take any actions, or if you don't at least enlighten that person who is being oppressed by another one, you're being part of that injustice. So that's something similar to what I'm Cuban, so I have somehow kind of an experience like he had. The only difference, the sea and the water, that's separating us from the rest of the world. He at least had the land to walk through. But I'm glad that you got out of North Korea and got to know what's the true freedom, and I'm so glad that I did as well.
Where were you coming out of?
So yeah, I'm Cuban. So my father had to
I
leave
see.
to Angola, and he
Uh-huh.
had to cross the sea and everything. So I'm
Uh-huh.
glad that you
Thank you.
were able to.
Okay, thank you.
You're
So there we have, there we have something to start with. And I just think about our class again, and I think about the kind of questions you've had about how you make human rights work, and when it works, and where it works, and then what that means for you and for your country. Would you like to kind of reflect on that question, or ask other questions?
I think I need at least a few more years to process that complex thoughts. But I think one response is that when it comes to talk about moral responsibilities versus legal responsibilities, I don't remember exact quote, but I believe Martin Luther King, Dr. King said, "We are not freed." We can't be freed unless
All people.
all people are freed. I don't think I'm quoting that exactly, but yeah, that's where I stand. I think the true freedom comes when not only I'm free, but also people that we care about. So that's where I stand, I think.
So maybe we can, like the workings of human rights, that when you said that North Korea doesn't kind of play, well, I recharacterize it as play well with others. It doesn't operate in the international diplomatic system in a way that we're familiar with. It doesn't, when someone said we need to hear the voices of North Koreans, there are no voices of the press. There is no civil society. There are maybe just a few refugees. When the human rights movement as it built, and you've brought up examples of South Africa, that a lot of the power of organizing in human rights really came from countries like the United States and came from students, and we studied that together. But one of the big differences, or two differences in the case of South Africa, was one, you had the African National Congress, which was leading the campaign, which was telling the world what it needed, and making sure that others went along, so that the boycott was driven by South Africa, so that the campus crusades were run with that inspiration of the ANC. And secondly, that South Africa was a Western ally tied into the Western capitalist banking, mining industry in such a way that they were influenceable. So so what about North Korea? Is North Korea influenceable through the normal tools of human rights that we've developed through time? And feel free to just think broadly and share your thoughts about how your thoughts have evolved on this, because I know that you've given this a lot of thought over time.
Yes, so I would like to respond that question in two ways. Number one, someone from the audience earlier mentioned that we have issues at our home. Why don't we focus on domestic issues first before we go abroad? Yes, but I think we can do both. I think we can take care of domestic issues, but also in abroad. And also, I think the civil society is a key element. I think even United States, U.S. government can be wrong on so many occasions. But the difference between liberal democracy versus in authoritarianism or authoritarian government is that in the United States we have a civil society and groups that have the opportunity to hold accountable of our government. So I think that's the probably the benefit, the most that is the wisdom of democracy in my understanding. In terms of in North Korea, yes, in South Africa, in the sense that students in the United States could create a movement that that supports, not supports, I mean the boycotting, and which, in my opinion, if I remember correctly, those movements led into companies and corporations to leave the country, which brought attention for the oppressors at the time. So in that sense, yes, in North Korea, we can't have and start a movement in the sense we can't create a protest or on the streets in North Korea. But I do think that we have an opportunity to create a movement in their minds, in the minds of North Korean people. What do I mean by is that North Korean regime, one of their control tools was information blockade, which was basically completely cutting off the information going inside and outside of North Korean regime. So North Korean citizens had no choice but to believe what they were told, and that system worked. But I think that is starting to change, which I talked about in my senior thesis. I think more and more North Koreans are curious about outside of the regime, and I don't think that, in my opinion, fear cannot dominate curiosity. What I mean by it is that when ordinary North Korean people started asking questions about how come South Korea is so much richer than us when we have the same history, same culture, and I think those questions will eventually subvert the regime, because that questioning the regime is something that was not only permissible, but not also it was not desired among the citizens. But I think more and more North Korean people are thinking about where they are today, and also questioning whether what they have been told is true or not. So yes, we can't go in North Korea and create a movement, but I think one of the roles that we can play, when I mean by we, that includes international community, but also non-profit organizations. We could send information inside North Korea, which will help them to come up with more and more questions. So that's, I think, one way to start. But
Maybe just to understand again, with a country that is so rigid and so closed, How does that even happen? Is it through because of their need to open up a little bit economically, that's allowed in information that's come along the way? How is there any information that actually is flowing to the country? And how do you know whether it's affecting people's consciousness?
So, um, there are still, I mean, one is there is illegal trade activities on the border side within North Korea, where North Koreans would take their natural goods and take it and trade with some other industrial goods from China. So that's one way to information. When I say information, it could be as simple as movies from South Korea, movies from Hollywood. Those will inevitably will change North Korean people's mind, because a lot of times in North Korea, the movies are about how a citizen must devote and die for the regime and the leader. Whereas in movies from Hollywood, um, there are movies that dying for their lovers, which is quite revolutionary in North Koreans' perspective. So I think those different contents will change their mind. And so illegal trade activities done between North Korean ordinary citizens, between Chinese citizens, that's one way. And also North Korean regime has their own trade companies that is quasi-independent from the state, but still be able to trade goods between China. And also there are about 30,000 North Koreans living in South Korea. They also have been key agent where they were sending money back to North Korea to their family members so that they can survive, and they along the way it's also an opportunity where they can send the information to the country. And there are also a few different organizations that are specifically working on sending movies and documentaries or even Bibles through USB. And one of the reasons why I titled my thesis was usually the corruption is not a great for system, because corruption can bring down the system of governance. But in my opinion, I think the kind of corruption that I have been able to analyze and study during my research was, I think corruption is actually works for the North Korean people and in a good way. So what I mean by it is that because so the police, state police, they were the one who's supposed to surveil and watch people, but they're also, during the famine, they were also not getting enough food from the regime. So let's say I was watching a foreign movie at a home and I got caught. I could basically say, hey, like, can you just like give me a pass this time? I will give you X, Y, Z amount of money. And the police also needs to feed the family and support the family. So when the police accept that bribe, he become part of the involved with that crime. So they become mutual hostage. So in that sense, the North Korean regime, it's harder for them to rely on local police force to effectively monitor the entire country. So in that sense, I think corruption is working well for the North Korean people. So that's what I meant.
So because the border is somewhat porous and they've allowed illegal trade, and there's some North Koreans who are able to get goods in and then have enough to also bribe police and keep those networks going, that's where that corruption has actually contributed to the possibilities of people learning more and knowing about what's happening. One of the things that you and I spoke about briefly when I was being, I don't want to, this is one of the most depressing subjects on earth. So we need to make sure we recognize the horrors of it and also come out looking at the bright spots that are real, and I know they are real. But just for the depressing bits again, as someone again who's been working in human rights for my whole career, I'm generally depressed every morning when I get up. I get excited by all the stories of activism and movements. I don't know if anyone wants to be excited about something. You need little hopeful moments in the world. There were just very exciting, successful elections in Zambia last week. Check out your papers, reason to be cheerful. But lots of reasons to be really sad and to think that the international pressures for human rights are getting harder and harder. And one of the reasons is the increased surveillance and technology that's also to be used. So all of the stories I've read about China and that border, they rely on the chaos of being able to cross. They rely on being able to operate between the cracks. And we were discussing this and this question. China could just end that tomorrow if they wanted, right?
Yes, but China has been so reluctantly. They say one thing in international stage. They say they support human rights, but in reality, they're sending North Koreans. They catch North Koreans and send back to North Korea, which, despite of knowing the grave consequences these individuals will face. And so yes, I mean, the question is how can we make China to comply with the international norms, and they have been stubborn in one
They've been
sense.
stubborn, and the border control has become worse, or it's the same? I mean, you mentioned that there's now more technology at the border, which means that it's even harder to use fraudulent IDs, to use the other tools that people had to cross before.
So the borders the security had become even more tightened. So since Kim Jong-un became in power, I believe in 2011, 12, the number of North Korean refugees being able to escape from North Korea to China and South Korea had dropped significantly. For example, like last year, we did not have a single North Korean refugee came to the United States. So it's becoming harder and harder for North Korean to escape. Not to say that it was easier, it was easy before, but it just became much harder. And technology comes to a play in China because we've used to be, at least if one North Korean refugee could have enough money or to buy fake ID, they could get around the city. And when the Chinese police ask ID, they could present that the hard copy of ID. Now they have a digital, I guess, electronic IDs, which is harder to play around with the system. So for North Koreans, it's really harder to. Number one, escaping North Korea has become harder. Find a way to freedom and safety in China became even more challenging.
We didn't talk about this most recently, but maybe I can ask you to talk a bit, because you've alluded to your sister's story. One of your, I've had two North Korean students in my entire life, and one of them I had at Columbia a couple of years ago. And I know you know her as well. Yeonming. And she has written a book about her own story and her mother being sold to men in China. And the extraordinarily complex, nuanced story of women being able to escape, and the perversities of the story of where, because they're because of the one-child policy in China, there's a demand for women that isn't met in China. And so there are this trade in women from North Korea, from Burma, from a few other places. It has a hideous vulgarity to it of the sale of a body, but in terms of the story that she tells, for example, it was a tool that she was able to use in order to manipulate and start the path to actually escaping the country. And I wonder about that, if you can comment a little bit about that. I mean, this is one path that has been a path of escape, but a path of escape into what can often be very repressive. And then on top of that, the Chinese government has often sent people back at times. There have been waves of that. Is that a phenomenon that you can help us to understand, to talk about it all? Or is that one that, the phenomenon of the trade in women and how that is evolving?
So it's deeply, whenever I think about those stories, it really makes me really upset, to say the least. But it is also true that women in North Korean women in China, they are like more vulnerable than North Korean defectors in China in some ways because of the, I guess, how do I say this? Yeah, they're often taken to sex trafficking industries. They're forced to sit in front of a camera and perform with no pay. And that is, for me, it's more, it could be my sister also. It could be, it's heartbreaking. How do I?
And has China responded to any pressure about this? Or when they get the pressure, do they simply deport these women back to North Korea?
They're definitely sending them back to North Korea whenever they find them. But it's also, you have to understand why North Koreans in China are facing so much difficulties is because by law, if a Chinese citizen shares at least one glass of water with a North Korean, they are subject to be punished, either if they have to pay a monetary fine, or if they don't have enough money to pay that fine, then they have to serve in a jail for I don't know how many days. Vice versa, if a Chinese citizen report a suspected North Korean, they also get a reward. So that's where the bad guys, for example, like sex trafficking industries or the brokers, they take advantage of a North Korean woman. Because, for example, when my mom went to China with my sister, she had given two options. One, you either sell your daughter to a man, or if you don't agree with my offer, then I will report you to local police. Then my sister and my mom would both be sent back to North Korea. So it's that systematic oppression gives an opportunity for this certain group of people to exploit the situation, and which is unacceptable. And yet it has been happening, and yeah.
I'd like to do a couple of things before we go to questions, and I hope you will have questions. Maybe we could pause for a moment, and if you could reflect back on your time coming to Bard. You know, we are at a moment when the value of liberal arts education is under attack. We're at a moment when the whole question of what is intellectual inquiry and what it should look like. And I wonder if you can, if you would mind, I mean, sharing with students as they're getting started what it meant for you. You came out of North Korea, you fled to China, you land in the United States, you study business in a community college, which I'm sure was good, but different in terms of the kind of study, and then you're thrust into this space of a kind of a different form of inquiry. What values have you taken from that? I mean, I listened to you, and I know you can't speak without quoting from some of the things that you read and thought about, but I wonder if you can share what worked for you in that, how it served you.
Number one, I think Bard College it's a special place for me, not only for its excellent, not only is it an excellent place for learning, but also this school has been very generous with my scholarship. I had full tuition to attend, so I'm very grateful, and I remain grateful to this school for giving me the opportunity to pursue an education. And in terms of your question, give me 1 second.
Sure.
Growing up with an Asian upbringing, meaning where speaking out loud or speaking up in class was not welcomed and not recommended in my culture, versus coming to Bard, it was all about, a lot of times the classes were about having an open debate, an open discussion and dialogue. So it was very hard for me to adapt that new setting or culture with my second, and then I had an issue with linguistic barriers. So I remember going to, coming out of each class, I replay the questions that I asked in class and the way I asked. And I remember just the mistakes that I made, and I really felt depressed not being able to articulate and ask better questions. But the only way that I could improve was keep asking and keep speaking up, because if I was embarrassed and feared of making mistakes and not asking questions, then I would not have progressed at all. So I think that experience alone was really valuable for me. I think it teaches you about humility and confidence in the same time, because confidence in the sense that I know, let me take it back. Humility in the sense that I walked each class with knowing that I know so little, and it's an opportunity to meet the new world. Confidence in the sense that it's a place where asking questions was so encouraged, and professors and faculty members at Bard, I think they do a great job encouraging their students to speak up, even if they have hard time articulating their questions. So I think that experience was so valuable for me.
Was anything else you would say about the things, about classes, places where you read things that really helped you to develop the ideas for what you're doing now?
So, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I really liked political philosophy and theory classes. I remember in my first year, I was taking Introduction to Political Philosophy course with Professor Samantha Hill. I think she left Bard, but so we read about Aristotle, Plato, all the way to contemporary philosophers. And I remember one of the homework was to read Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. That was in English was already my second language, and then this was in Old English. I remember reading introduction, 2 pages. I think was it first of man, I think is the title of that chapter. It's like only 2 pages. I read probably like 3 times, and it may took like over 3 hours, and I still didn't understand. So I went to office hours and asked for help. And that's first essay writing assignment was to, I remember that question very specifically. It was write about what's the difference between wisdom and knowledge in Plato's and Antigone? I forgot. So it was about writing an essay on the difference between wisdom and knowledge, and it was my first year. I wanted to do well, and I wanted to impress my professor, so I worked really hard, and I finished my paper in like a few days in advance, and I sent it to my professor saying, I would like to get a feedback before I get a final grade. And I thought she would say, this is great, just work on a few more of this, and then she asked me to come into office hours, and she was basically saying, I'm sorry, Joseph, but this is not acceptable academic paper. I will give you another week to work on it. And which I ended up getting an A on that, from that class, but it was so hard, but those classes really helped me to expand my thinking. So I always enjoyed classes such as political theory, and human rights was more personal than academic, but still I greatly enjoyed. I still remember some of the concepts that we studied in class, and international politics was obviously was my major, so I really enjoyed them. But answer to your question, funny enough, I did well on all those hard classes like political philosophy and international relations, and I had to take art history or as an requirement, and I really don't care much about art, or I don't understand art that much, so I didn't do well, and I was not interested in that class. And this was a class about making maps, and I was like, we have Google Map today. Why do I have to know about ancient maps? So I think I ended up getting B from that class. My point is that the classes that I studied really hard helped me asking better questions, but not really giving me, helped me to arrive and answer. I think that's what the philosophy courses are meant to be. On the other hand, this course, that history course that I did not enjoy at the time, ended up making I think I appreciate that class the most, because in that class we basically studied about, as a map maker in ancient time, what do you put in the space of map, because they have the, okay, I'm not gonna go into that detail, but basically through that class, I realized what I do every day becomes who I am. Meaning, after that class, I went through my YouTube account and Google a search engine history, and I basically studied what I watched and what I researched. And I realized that some of them were irrelevant to the goal that I would like to accomplish, and that made me help to. I'm really struggling with this, so let me find the next.
It's a great story, though. I love it.
Basically, after that class, I asked myself, how do I want to spend my time every day? Because what I watch, what I do, what I repeatedly do become who I am, and I didn't want to watch random stuff. Like I remember when I looked at my YouTube account, I was watching poker tournaments for hours and
Watching what?
hours. Texas Hold'em poker tournaments.
Oh, Texas Hold'em.
Yes.
Texas Hold'em
Yes.
poker tournaments. Yeah.
And I was like, I wanted to work on human rights issues, and how does this help me? And I was
Maybe it helps actually. I don't
spending
know.
like hours. So after that class, I made intentional about what I watch and how I spend my time. So yes, I think the classes that I found it most difficult, and then I had this class that I really didn't care much, but ended up giving me a really good lesson to be better with how I spend my time.
That seems like the greatest advice for everybody. Although I feel like I should probably watch Texas Hold'em and learn a lot. I'd get a lot out of that for my career.
We can trade.
Maybe we can trade. Yeah, excellent. So when Joseph was leaving, and he told me that he had a job at the Bush Foundation, and I was nervous, of course, because we Bard professors, we share our beliefs and our politics. We recognize that people have other politics, but my whole career is about raising doubts and being skeptical, and George Bush's role in the world is not one that I admired. And so we talked about it at the time, and I'm really excited that Joseph went in there eyes open, knowing what he was doing, and I think he's come to respect the parts of George Bush that have been committed to humanitarianism and human rights and are there. And do you want to say a few words about what your work has become and what the foundation, the center does, and sort of the bright spots of your work?
Sure. One, I come to know President Bush more, and he, based on my experience, he is a man of principles, and he's man of he's very kind and genuine, and I know, and that's my. To be honest, he's actually, when I grow up, I would like to become as kind, as humble, as confident person he is. And in terms of my work, I work at the Human Freedom Initiative at the George W. Bush Institute, where we focus on a few different things. Number one is on North Korea. We work on to promote policy that would integrate human rights and security at the same time. And another part of work is providing scholarship to North Korean refugees, and I was one of the first recipient of that scholarship, and I remain grateful to President Bush and George W. Bush Institute for founding a scholarship program for the North Korean refugees in the United States. There are no other scholarship foundations for the North Korean refugees, so it's very rare opportunity that, which in my opinion changes lives of many North Koreans living in the United States. So that's one part of the work, and we also focus on freedom and democracy, both at home and abroad. So we look at the health of our democracy at home, and also an opportunity to promote our values in abroad. And another part of a program that Human Freedom focuses on is helping to develop young leaders in Burma to become the next generation of the leaders to change the society they live in. Obviously, with their recent coup, we have to redesign and think about different ways to continue helping the scholars from Burma. So those are specific focus from my team, but Bush Institute as a whole, President Bush recently published a book called Out of Many One. It's a portrait of 43 Americans, 43 immigrants and refugees. And this, the purpose of this book is to demonstrate and illustrate that immigration is a blessing to our country for both economically and politically. They create jobs when they come to United States. They bring diversity, different backgrounds, which flourishes our democracy, in my understanding. So those are some of things that we, as an institute, focuses. We believe that freedom is universal, and that everyone should be entitled and enjoy the freedom that we enjoy today. And yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think it's really important to hear, especially when it's so easy sometimes from a distance to judge people and to make assumptions about what would otherwise be going on there. Shall we have questions? Yes, in the back. Okay, good.
On the live stream.
Okay, yeah.
Who raised their hand for a question?
If I knew I was going to have a mic, I might not have had a mic. So I have a really generic hope that there could be peace and human rights that the North Koreans could enjoy. What I keep stumbling over and have stumbled over for years is what is a practical hope I could have, even a small one. My head explodes when I consider the fact geopolitically that North Korea is a nuclear power that enjoys threatening, right, to use them in a way. So I also think about, I don't know how well we understand what is going on in the country. We've been in Afghanistan for 20 years and, seem to have left that in a mess, right? So what do we know would destabilize a country in a productive way, or allow for change in a productive way, or allow, set something off that would destabilize it in a way that could be kind of more dangerous. So I'm asking for anything, because I haven't detected from any president that I'm aware of any coherent foreign policy to figure out a solution. My only understanding is, just as a citizen, is that we are hoping China figures something out in some ways, because maybe they have more influence than we do. So I find, like I said, I have a pie in the sky hope for peace on earth, that I can pray to, but I don't know what a first step would be, or a second step would be, or any practical vision, right, of what could happen.
So I am aware of the recent development in Afghanistan, and the Bush Institute is also working very hard, especially these days, to look for different options to help our allies and partners safely getting out of that country. Having said that, it is not my area of expertise, so I can't really speak on about that challenges. But when I read and listen to news and podcasts, I think a lot of times we focus on whether we agree or disagree with one political view over another. I think we have plenty of time for that in the future. Colleges and universities are a great place to have that debate going forward. But today, I think we have to focus on solutions. And I hope that this country and politics, people in DC will spend more time on come up with the solutions. In terms of going back to actionable items, I think when it in North Korea, particularly, yes, you're right. When you don't know, it's hard to know where to start. One way is to learn more about the human rights issues and the views going on, because a lot of, in my opinion, all the great changes come from the minds. You have to have the information and knowledge and heart to change and help. So that's one place. But also there are organizations that focus on rescuing North Korean refugees from China to safety, like South Korea or the United States. So, for example, I didn't actually mention about an organization that brought me to United States. It's called LINK, stands for Liberty in North Korea. It's a fascinating organization. It was actually founded by college students on college campus. Basically, a group of students watched documentary about North Korean human rights issues, and they said it's enough. Let's do something about it, and they started this fundraising, and basically they from selling fried Oreos to through different concerts or parties, they raised enough money to brought me to the United States. So if anyone from the audience have a doubt that you're too young or that that you were not well educated enough to bring changes in the world, um, I would I would kindly disagree. You have the power and opportunity to make what's possible into reality. And without that group of college students, I would not be here today. So I know this is times of it's difficult times, but I think through these difficult times, we also wanted to imagine. We want to prepare for worse, but we also always wanted to um, wish for the best, and I think we have that opportunity and power to do tangible goods that actually changes lives.
More questions?
Hi. So the question that I have is generally to talk more about the moral responsibility and the legal responsibility that other countries might have when it comes to human rights and protecting human rights. So I'm from a country where our own government isn't necessarily the best at protecting human rights of individuals unless they're like extremely privileged people. Um, and we have lots of issues going on in our own country in terms of people fighting for their rights, in terms of people fighting for separation or just liberty as well. With that said, we have large actors across the world who are considered to be the superpowers, the US, Russia, China, who generally don't have the best track record when it comes to protecting human rights. We've seen that in places like Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq. And within China, we've seen it with North Koreans, we've seen it with Uyghur Muslims, we see it in Rohingya and Burma, all these places. With that said, what then do you think would be the best practical method for relying on different countries or relying on different actors to try to benefit human rights? And if that can't happen, what would be the best method to try to bring about a change in terms of protecting human rights or guaranteeing human rights for individuals?
Is that clear enough, or should we press him to be more specific?
I would like to have some more clarity.
I think it's a good, I mean, you laid out the question beautifully, but I wonder if you could focus more on what you mean in terms of the responsibility of other countries or relying on other countries. And maybe even give your own idea of what you think is possible. You're talking about how you pressure other countries, what's appropriate.
Right. So it's more about like the accountability that we can place on other countries.
How much can they be accountable?
Yeah. How much can we?
How much is the United States accountable for what's for taking action for North Korea? How much is?
Right. Yeah. So, how much can we hold other countries accountable for taking action in other countries where human rights aren't guaranteed? North Korea is one of them. Even places like Afghanistan right now is one of them. How can we just hold other countries responsible for trying to maintain human rights within those countries, since we can't rely on like the governments of those countries to do it, since they're the ones suppressing the rights in a lot of cases.
How do we hold them accountable? How do we pressure them to act?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yes, but I think that question you should answer that question. I think. Let me respond in this way. Again, I think I'm well aware of some of the domestic issues at home, and I'm not saying that there is no issues in the United States. But at the same time, give me 1 second. Let me put it in this way. Just because we are imperfect doesn't mean we cannot desire for perfection. Meaning, I mean, think about probably no mother is a perfect human being. If that mother is perfect, then perhaps she's not a human anymore. But just because she's not perfect doesn't mean we should demand her not to kill her children, right? So that's uh, that's how I view. So yes, United States, we have issues at home that must be addressed. But at the same time, it's also we have we should care about countries in abroad. And in terms of holding accountable of these oppressors and regimes in other countries, yeah, it is difficult. But just because it's difficult, when we give up, these oppressors become even more oppressive. So, for example, I think the current heated debate in international politics or relations is what does the world would look like when China increase to when they gain more power in international stage. I think that in my understanding, the United States is a powerful nation not only because we have the best economy and the best military equipments, but it's also the ideas and that we promoted that also we it's the basic understanding that the human rights of other countries is equally important as ours at home. I think that that idea is also makes us unique. The question is, would China, when they gain so much power, would they focus on improving human rights of other countries when they have um, concentration camps for Uyghurs? I mean, it's not sure. And I think, yes, give me 1 second to. I think when the United States withdraw their roles in being the human rights champion or promoting human rights in abroad, I think when we I think that's an opportunity for countries like Russia and China to gain more power, and I'm not sure if that's necessarily would be a better and safer word. And I worry that absence of a U.S. role in international community is an opportunity for those competing power countries. And so yeah, again, uh, I recognize that we are not perfect, but at the same time, we should still strive for better and perfection.
wants to say something, but I'll say it at the end. We can know their question.
I don't want to speak for the person who just asked the question before, but I feel like I think this was like a part of their first question that they initially asked, and I would like, I guess, an answer to this part of the question. How do you want, it doesn't even just have to be the United States, but if, I guess because due to a lot of the bigger powers' bad track record with, I guess, participating in other people's foreign affairs and everything, how would you like, I guess, people to feel, well, citizens in that country, how would you like for them to feel, I guess, comfortable with some foreign, like, interaction due to, I guess, history of sometimes foreign action going, like, wrong? Like, a lot of the issues that, I'm not saying with North Korea, but with other issues, I feel like a lot of it was caused by foreign interaction, some of which is like because of the United States, some of which is because of China, some of which is because of Russia. How would you, I guess, like how would we go about, I guess, fixing that due to their bad track record? Not to say that like anyone has to be perfect or anything, it's just if like someone has a historic pattern of doing something, then obviously people are gonna be, I guess, like wary, I guess. Sorry if my question's confusing.
I think the questions are really good, and I see they, can I just ask you all a question? How many of you think that no matter what the United States does, once it intervenes, it's gonna make things worse? So I think that that's a powerful position, and it's a hard one to overcome because of the way we sometimes approach history. And what I heard Joseph say is something that's more familiar to me from what I hear from activists around the world, which is the United States has been really awful, it's worse if they're gone. You know, the food is terrible and there's not enough of it. It's a strange and contradictory position. When I went to the UN at the point that Trump was in office, and I was sitting with a Sudanese friend who'd been a big critic of the United States throughout the years, he said the worst thing we're facing here at the UN is that the United States has shut up on human rights issues. I didn't like them when they were in control. I hate their arrogance. It's worse when they don't say anything. And I think that's the dynamic. And I think it's something you should put on your agendas for your college careers to consider and to explore, because there ain't no easy answer to it. It's a ripping dilemma for how to engage in the world to try to make things better, and if there's a way to do it. And the only thing I would add to that, as someone who's been in this world for the last 30-some years, is that there's no single solution. There's no such thing as do no harm. That's the stupidest motto outside of outside of being a doctor in a clinic. It's useless. There's no such thing. You'll never know what harm you might cause by being there or not being there, and you have to be able to balance and think about those risks. So that's what I wanted to bring out in your question, because I feel like that's part of it. Where many of us in the room are sitting thinking, look, tell me, you know, of course I look at this and it looks like we could intervene and help, but I know if the US does it, they're just gonna screw things up. If you can get Sweden and the Gambia and Costa Rica to lead troops, great. Yeah, sorry, go back to you.
No, you're fine. I somewhat agree. It's just that, and I saw like when I looked around and I saw like some people, I guess, raise their hand and like say that that like they think that any sort of United States interaction would like cause harm. I could understand like their sentiment, I guess, due to how, and this isn't just the United States, this is with like a lot of the big powers, how I guess their help per se and their activism is based off of a profit motive, I guess. And I feel like once they like take the resources and take I guess, what they need from a country that is struggling or a place that is struggling, I feel like they're not going to really continue being as much help. And I feel like we've seen that in history multiple times. So I don't, like, I can understand why people, I guess, like I said, are wary.
Yeah, well, let's go back to Joseph. And just to let me just add to that and hopefully not take away, to say, I imagine that you deal with a lot of people who are pretty belligerent, who think U.S. should just go in and bomb them and solve this problem. And so you probably see people across a spectrum in terms of people who say, we need to intervene, well, versus we can't intervene in this way. Can you comment on that yourself in terms of what you see out there as far as that will to intervene and the willingness to acknowledge the risks?
Yes, so I think the technical term for that is there's two different approaches in terms of North Korea. One is a soft landing and one is hard landing. And I'm not an expert on this subject, so I really shouldn't talk about it. But based on my limited understanding of the two terminologies, that hard landing is where, yes, we take troops and we bomb the city and the strategic locations. But I'm afraid that that is not possible because North Korean regime has nuclear weapons. I don't know how one state can start a war and not be hurt. I mean, it's not matter of whether whether United States will win the war or not, but if just one, yeah, I don't know nuclear weapons. I'm just worried that it could the conventional war tactics could easily escalate into nuclear war, and we certainly don't want to. We certainly understand the outcome of what nuclear war would look like. So that's, in my opinion, should be avoided. Soft landing is where it's slow change, but that start with perhaps working with providing economic incentive for the North Korean regimes to slowly open up the borders. Where do I stand? I'm not sure if. Give me 1 second. I have to think a little bit more about it, but it's. I'm not sure if we have a good actionable items that would deliver the goals that we would like to see. Sorry, that was really poorly addressed answer to your beautiful question. Or
I think we need to end, right?
Yeah, I was going to say these. I just want to encourage. We'll do maybe one more question. One of the things I wanted to say is that in the conversation we've been talking about governments and sort of foreign policy action, and I would say one of the benefits of the United States is that we have civil society, and that's something that we have. You spoke a little bit about how important civil society. It wasn't a government that was important to getting you to the United States. It was the actions of individuals and citizens. And I co-teach in the Open Society University Network, and we had a class this summer, and we had about 7 students from Afghanistan. And what we are hearing from them now is Americans don't know how powerful their individual voices are, and they're not using their individual voices on behalf of us. So there are governments, and then there are people. And there's a great book by Eric Liu called You're More Powerful Than You Think. And every time I'm reading Stacey Abrams' book right now on elections, and every time that there's an organizer, they talk about power. And they talk about how governments convince us sometimes that we don't have power or that we can't do things. And the actions of those college students, the example that you gave, Joseph, is very powerful. And what we see when we see the big picture is that we see that it's very hard to be an actor in that situation and that it's very complicated, and maybe I don't have the expertise. But there are ways that you can take action, both for the things that you care about domestically at home, which actually reflect transnationally. So what you're doing at home around elections or around your community can have a transnational impact. And what we haven't really talked about is transnational organizations and other organizations that also have their complicated histories with NGOs and everything and acting and being problematic. But there are ways, that's why you're here, is to study and imagine what is possible, because without imagination, without aspiration, I think that's what you were getting at, Joseph, without that, then without some radical hope, that then you can kind of give in to the nihilism. And I think what our friends are saying within the BARD network, at least, is please don't give in to that, because that is also an easy way to not be, acting in some way. And I think that nihilism and cynicism is important, and being out in the field is important too. So how do you balance all of those things? And that's what you're going to wrestle with these huge questions the whole time that you're here. But when part of why BARD is part of this big international network is that we believe colleges have the responsibility to be civic actors, and that's why we're in partnership with these 40 universities around the world. That's why we are a partner with the American University of Afghanistan, which is now closed, and where the Taliban is now in charge. That was a university 2 weeks ago. So imagine the response of those students, and imagine what that's like. And so then you can't just give up on them and say, oh, well, the United States, whatever. But it's so important to ask these big questions. So you ask the really big questions, while at the same time you ask yourself, okay, so what responsibility do I have? And it may be just doing a fundraising, raising awareness, a lot of social media. You guys are really social media savvy. So I think it's like demanding answers to the big questions and demanding a lot out of your government, while also asking the same things of yourselves too. And that's part of what we ask in our classes. What is our responsibility to this? And I think that's what Peter's been getting at a bit too. So it's really complicated and messy, but we have the ability to actually ask these questions and talk honestly to each other, and that isn't necessarily the case in some other places. So I'm going to end on your question. Is that okay? And then obviously Joseph's around, and he's part of the BARD network, and so is available to you, and he can be connected with you in the future if you want.
Yeah, I want to be respectful of your time and everyone's time here. I just have a really small question to do with US foreign policy. So obviously we've seen over the years US foreign policy has substantially changed from Bush, Obama, Trump, and now Biden. So my country in particular was ravaged by the war on terror to a degree, not as much as Afghanistan, but pretty close to Afghanistan. My question for you specifically, Joseph, is how have you seen US's foreign policy on North Korea change over time? Obviously, we saw it change substantially from Obama to Trump, and now probably to Biden as well. How have you seen those changes occur, and have you seen those changes to be positive, negative, given the different presidents, and what do you think the best approach to US's foreign policy on North Korea going forward would be?
A simple question.
Yes, so much simplicity. So start with President Bush's time, and he had a strong stance on North Korean regime and how the regime is treating its own citizens. And he also opened the pathway for North Korean refugees to be able to come to US. If it wasn't that 2004 North Korean Human Rights Act, which President Bush signed and became US law, I could not come to the United States. So yes, you can disagree about his policy on North Korea, but I don't think anyone can dispute the opportunities that he laid out for many North Korean refugees to come to the United States, and that includes myself. In terms of during President Obama's administration, I think the exact term was strategic patience. I still don't understand well enough about to make a comment, but um, in terms of political actions, I don't think there was any. Um, I don't think North Korea was big priority during that administration. But at the same time, Ambassador Samantha Power, who was U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and she worked on. She definitely comes from a human rights activist background, and as a journalist. So I think it was great to have her and have her support in continuously raising awareness in at home, but also on international stage. President Trump's administration was, in my opinion, I was disappointed because when he became president and when he visited South Korea in 2017, I believe, he spoke great deal about North Korean human rights issues at his speech during where he gave in the parliamentary, South Korean parliamentary. And then we saw a complete different a change in 2000 and even in 2018 he invited to a few North Korean refugees and highlighted their story at the State of the Union address. And then when he actually had the opportunity to meet with Chairman Kim Jong-un, he basically chose not to mention anything about human rights. So the question is, was North Korean human rights rhetoric, was it a political tool or a goal for him? If I have to guess, and based on, yeah, I think it was more of a political goal, political tool than a goal. So as a North Korean refugee, I was very disappointed to see his interactions with Chairman Kim Jong-un. I keep referring his title because I wanted to make sure that I am respectful of the conference, but not respecting the individual. But having said that, yeah, I think um, it was not a bright moment of U.S. History. United President of the United States doesn't just say, "Oh, I'm good friend of human rights oppressor." That does not sit well as it just does not look good on. Um, that's not what American presidents stands for. They don't. They're not supposed to go and say, I'm a good friend of this person who he knew that he was not treating his own people well. So it was disappointing moment. I don't know what the United States policy on North Korea today well enough to make a comment, but I hope that this administration would recognize that human rights has to be central of its foreign policy when it comes to dealing with North Korea, because United States cannot achieve its goal of denuclearizing the regime without seeing the improvement of human rights at home. So in my opinion, human rights and security challenges are not separate subject. I think they're connected, and that must be addressed. And I hope that we would make a right choice. I think lastly, Yeah, actually, I would end there. But relevant to your question, I guess my last words for you is to enjoy your first year, study hard, but also have fun and discover yourself and learn from each other. And I hope that you really have a great time and you are in a great place to challenge your thoughts. And if anything, this is place where you are allowed to express any questions that you have. So congratulations and have a great and successful year.
So I think that's a perfect place to end, and I want to thank Joseph and thank you. I feel like we really covered a kind of we flew high and we descended to really important points. I just want to end with kind of connecting the pieces for me and for you in a way that I think hopefully will add to what Joseph has said. Joseph has told us an international story that takes place in ways that are beyond our reach and yet come home to us in different ways because of choices that people have made, the issues they've taken on in their colleges and elsewhere, and the search for ways to be helpful, to be useful, to connect, while also being politically savvy and aware. And I think those are the issues of our times, and they're changing, and none of us have answers. We live near where the birthplace of Eleanor Roosevelt was, and there's a nice statue to Eleanor Roosevelt there with a nice little plaque. And Eleanor Roosevelt's an intriguing character, and I hope you'll kind of think about her in somewhere in the course of your education, because she played such an intriguing role in national, local, and international politics. And among other things headed the commission that drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and was really pushed out by the Republicans afterwards during the Cold War. She was a powerful figure. Even before Franklin, she was a powerful figure. And in answering the question, where do human rights start, she said, she had one of her lines was that human rights start, oh, now I've got as I said that, of course, the exact
At
words.
home.
Well, not at home, but in small places close to home.
Small places that don't have,
In
that are
small
on a map.
places close to home. And I think that sense of, there were various times in the story of human rights where we became so focused on the global, on the international, that we also lost track of the local and lost track of issues in our own lives and our families and our communities. And I think the issues in our lives and families are back on the agenda in really powerful ways, but to recognize the interconnections and to be able to act on them and find ways to do it, I hope you will all give that some thought in the course of your years here at Bard. So thank you, and thank Joseph.
Thank you, Joseph.